New York's classic rock, Q1043.
Good morning and Happy New Year to you all. So, every single celebrity guest who we have talked to in the last month or so on the Jim Kerr Rock and Roll Morning Show has always brought up, did you see Get Back? Did you see Get Back? And if you haven't seen it, you have to see it because you're like a fly wall. I know some people who have seen it more than once. Peter Jackson did a tremendous job with this basically 8-hour documentary. But long before there was the documentary Get Back on Disney Plus, there was the book Let It Be by Steve Matteo, which came out in 2004. And Steve Matteo is joining us this morning. Now, he has also done biographies on Dylan. It's called Dylan, and he has written about music in everything from Rolling Stone to Blender, Spin, the New York Times. And just let me tell you some of the quotes, the reviews for this book, Let It Be by Steve Matteo. Rolling Stone says, ideal for the rock geek who thinks liner notes just aren't enough. Nylon says it's passionate, obsessive, and smart. Bold Type says religious tracks for the rock and roll faithful. So Steve, first of all, congratulations. And how did this all come about for you? So much preceding the wonderful documentary, which I hear you actually consulted on.
Yes, the person that did the research for Apple contacted me because he knew about my book, and he just wanted to sort of pick my brain. So that was a long time ago, obviously. But so yeah, I mean, in a nutshell, I had written a book on Bob Dylan, a biography of Bob Dylan. I had heard about this series called 33 and a Third that would focus on one album. And I contacted the editor, and to make a long story short, he's like, yes, we'd love to have you, do a book in the series. So would you like to do Bob Dylan? And I said, well, I kind of just did Bob Dylan and I'd like to do something else. I said, how about the Beatles? And he was like, yeah, that's great, because we don't have Dylan and we don't have the Beatles. And when he asked me, well, what album do you want to do? When I said, Let It Be, I think he was a little surprised. But, it's such a great story because it's, there was a film, it's the end of the Beatles, more or less. It's the end of, the 60s. It's, all the stuff going on with Apple Records. And it's just a great story. And of course, all the bootlegs that have come out through the years. So there's hours and hours of documentation of this that prior to the Peter Jackson film, both film and audio, only people who are obsessive bootleggers have, either heard or seen. So I knew it was a great story. It was around the time of the Phil Spector trial, and some of the tapes had just been recovered at that point. So, the journalist in me, as opposed to the music person in me, said, this is a great story. And, this is why I want to do it. And I'm so glad I did it, as it turns out,
I know. So you interviewed everyone from engineers to the documentary crew, people who worked for Apple, and you have quotes from the Beatles, but you didn't actually talk to Paul or
No,
Ringo.
no, I didn't. I've met Paul, but I didn't interview either one of them for the book. They generally don't, contribute to people's books about the Beatles unless it's something that they do, or something that, like someone like Dennis O'Dell. I think Paul did something for his book. Dennis was the producer of Let It Be. He was the head of Apple Films. But, I talked to the Michael Lindsay Hogg, who directed the film. I talked to people who worked at Apple. I talked to people that worked at, Capitol Records, and, a lot of different people. I talked to Klaus Vormann, which was really great. I talked to Alan Parsons, who was there. He was just a fledgling young engineer at the time. And so, it was a great experience. I talked to somebody who worked at Abbey Road Studios, who was actually there the day the Beatles showed up for their audition. I mean, which is just mind-boggling. And he told a great story about how they showed up. He said their equipment was like held together with like string and glue. practically, you know.
Huh.
So it's great to talk to all these folks who have worked with the Beatles in some capacity.
So, okay, there might be another book in you from this, right? Because I mean, this book really was just about the Let It Be album. So you kept it very narrowly focused, but you just revealed to me in your conversations, you learned a lot more about the Beatles than that, than just
Well,
focusing on the album.
well, I did get into the film a little bit in the book. And, you know, there some of these things that have come out with, you know, the Get Back film, are I found them true when I did my book, that it wasn't all gloom and doom. You know, I talked to somebody, and I don't remember, I think it was somebody who worked at Apple, who said to me, you know, John Lennon would walk in the room and people would fall down on the floor laughing because he was such a cut up. So the story that we knew before Get Back was that this was gloom and doom. It was horrible. They hated each other, you know, and it wasn't true. I mean, yeah, there was a certain amount of, you know, gloom and doom when they were working on it in the beginning at Twickenham. But I mean, once they moved to Apple, to the basement, to their own studio, and got the sort of equipment sorted out, I mean, you could see they were happy. They were in their little home. You know, they weren't under the gun of Abbey Road, even though they sort of ruled Abbey Road. It still was not their home like Apple was. So, you know, that's what I had discovered, that, you know, the whole period wasn't this, you know, horrible disaster. I mean, you have a great album. I mean, any album that has Let It Be, Get Back, and The Long and Winding Road on it, and Two of Us, that's a pretty good album, you know?
I am speaking with Steve Matteo long before Get Back, the Peter Jackson documentary on Disney Plus, which so many of us are absolutely obsessed with. In 2004, he wrote the book, part of the 33 and a third series. It's called Let It Be, and it's all about the sessions leading up to the album Let It Be and leading up to the rooftop concert. What was the biggest surprise, some of the biggest surprises that you uncovered in doing research and interviews for this book?
I mean, you know, I think that, you know, John in the beginning was definitely struggling. I think he was, you know, it's no secret, him and Yoko were dabbling with various substances. I mean, you can kind of see it, but then he sort of comes, you know, more into it. I think you can see once Billy Preston shows up. I mean, he's just thrilled. I mean, it was George who really brought, you know, Billy into the fold at that point. But you could see that John was just thrilled to be playing. You know, John wanted Billy in the group. And Paul was sort of like, well, I think four of us is more than enough to begin with, you know, five of us, the four of us, he's basically saying the four of us can't get along. You want to make it five. So, you know, I think that, you know, whatever differences they had, I think they still were brothers. They had been through so much. They created this thing, the Beatles. And I think there's a certain amount of pride there that they all had in it. I think the thing too that I really discovered is, with all the chaos going on, Ringo never for a moment is off. He is just on all the time. I mean, that album is a drum clinic as far as I'm concerned. I mean, he's not the flashiest drummer. He's not Keith Moon. He's not Ginger Baker, but he is solid right on, and he plays the songs. I mean, he's there to be the drummer for the two greatest songwriters in rock music. So I think that's one of the things. I mean, he's just solid as a rock, Ringo.
And he doesn't get involved. He was almost, well, watching Get Back, oblivious and seemed to be drinking quite a bit.
I don't, you know, I don't think he was oblivious. I think they all kind of dabbled a little bit. You know, when things are condensed like that over hours and days, it seems like they're drinking all the time. You know,
Well, that's a
and
good point.
you know what I mean. And I think, you know, the whole idea of, you know, like looked like an ad for cigarettes or something because they were smoking so much.
But
You know,
but he didn't seem to get involved in the drama. That's what I meant.
I think in the case of that, he was the sort of person who got along with everybody in the group. He was like the peacemaker. And, it was, John and Paul, there's this love hate, obviously, there's this competition. And then George is always kind of sort of left out a little bit. You know what I mean? So there's that dynamic. And I just think, Ringo is just like the world fell in love with Ringo as soon as they met him, and they have not stopped being in love with him. And I think that has not changed. And that was the case then.
Then there's the issue of Yoko, because through the years, so many believed that she was really the source of the breakup of the Beatles. And you really don't see any hostility whatsoever watching Get Back. But something that you said in the book, you see her reading newspapers, just poring over newspapers while all this is going on. And you point out in the book, it wasn't exactly newspapers. What was she poring over?
Well, I mean, I think she wanted to know everything that's going on. You know what I mean? So she's looking at articles about, John and Yoko, and what the press is saying about her.
Basically clippings.
Right. So, the press office, that's what, in the old days, that's what the press office did. They physically got the materials together.
Right, because we couldn't Google it. You couldn't Google it.
Right,
there was no Google.
Right. I remember, somebody who's written about music and has been at, record company offices, of publicists literally sitting on the floor with newspapers and magazines and literally cutting them up, tear sheets. They call them cuttings in England. That's what they call them, So yeah, John and Yoko were obsessed with the media. They were obsessed with what everybody was saying about them, but they were also, they were McLuhan children. They got this whole media global village thing. They were very shrewd in the way that they used the media to get their peace message out. John's attitude was, look, they're going to write about us anyway. They're going to put cameras in front of us anyway. Let's not make it about us. Let's make it about peace. So while that might seem, maybe a little, sly or whatever, I think that they believe that. They felt like, who cares? We're just making records and we're in love. But what we can do here is maybe we can make a little bit of a difference in the world, and we'll use the media,
So what did you think of Get Back?
I loved it. The first episode it's a little tedious. It kind of goes on and on. But people think that, rock and roll is this, glamorous thing. And working in a recording studio, making a record it's tedious work, and it takes time. And touring is hard work. Ask Bruce Springsteen how hard touring is, it's work. They love it, but it's work. So I think once they left Twickenham and they went to Apple, it became more fun. And, that was well lit. It just seemed like they were more relaxed. The songs were more developed at that point. You're literally watching McCartney write some of the greatest songs ever from scratch, right. Which is just, and I think that was one of the things I also felt when I did my research and I listened to some of these tapes. McCartney's ability to just, write songs. The way that he writes melodies is just incredible. He has this melodic sense that is just, it's extraordinary,
We only have about a minute left. Anything we haven't covered here you'd like to tell the listeners about?
I just hope that, they're going to put a Blu-ray and a DVD out of this, and that maybe there'll even be more material. I know a lot of people.
The director's cut.
The director's cut, right. I know a lot of people really would love an audio version of the entire Rooftop concert. But, with the interviews that I've read with Giles Martin, who I didn't interview but for this project, but I've interviewed Giles, is, the Rooftop concert is something to be seen and not just heard. So we'll see what's to come. What's announced today is the next big thing is the John Lennon and Yoko Ono Sometime in New York live double album is going to get a new reissue. So that's the big Beatles news today that is breaking.
Awesome. I thank you, Steve Matteo. You can still buy his book, Let It Be by Steve Matteo. It's part of the 33 and a Third series. If you missed any part of this, you can catch up with my podcast. Just download the iHeartRadio app. It is free, and my podcast is called Sonstein Sessions. And I'll see you guys tomorrow morning on the Jim Kerr Rock and Roll Morning Show, Q104.3.
New York's classic rock, Q1043.